Hi. This wasn't the video I intended to make today, but it's the one I think needed to be made. I'm behind on rent, and I don't say that for pity. I say it because I need to be witnessed. Because the shame that comes from struggling in silence is a sickness that eats you from the inside out. And if I've learned anything, it's that hiding the truth never actually heals it. About 6 months ago, I took a job that I thought would change everything. It was remote, it was flexible, it promised decent pay, and it looked on paper like something I could do well. But within the first 2 weeks, I knew something was deeply wrong. Every time I sat down to work, my chest would tighten, my hands would shake, I would dissociate in the middle of training calls, and I started having panic attacks after my shifts. And I couldn't figure out why. I kept telling myself I should be fine. The job wasn't bad, it wasn't abusive or overly toxic, but my entire body was acting like it was under threat. Eventually, I realized I was. Not because the job was dangerous, but because my nervous system couldn't tell the difference. The job mimicked the exact same tactics that I had been trained in growing up as a Jehovah's Witness. It was an insurance sales role that on the surface looked like a decent next step. What I didn't expect was how closely their tactics would mirror something I'd spent years trying to escape. They taught us to build rapport by starting with freebies, offering resources that were supposedly secured for the member. That was our foot in the door. And then once the call felt friendly and safe, the bait and switch hit. While I'm here, let me walk you through the life insurance that we think is the best fit for your family. Even though the insurance job was over video calls, the rhythm was hauntingly familiar. It sounds harmless, but for someone raised as a Jehovah's Witness, it mirrored something chillingly familiar. In the ministry, we were taught to find something visible about a person's home, whether a child's toy or a neat garden or a welcome sign, and use it to build immediate rapport. Then, before they knew it, we'd pivot the conversation into a religious pitch. And even though this job wasn't religious, my body didn't know the difference. It recognized the script. It remembered the pressure to be polite and persuasive and emotionally inauthentic. And before I knew it, I was spiraling. I couldn't think. I couldn't get out of bed. My body didn't fight it. It didn't run. It just froze. And the truth is, my nervous system never picked fight or flight. It picked freeze or fawn. However, freeze has always been my default ever since I was too young to defend myself. Too small to be believed. Because the things I survived started so early, I didn't even know there were other options. And when you learn to freeze before you learn to speak, it becomes your default operating system. My trauma didn't train me to run, it trained me to disappear. It's like being emotionally cryogenically frozen. You're aware, awake, but unable to act. And when the thaw starts, it's messy, painful, slow, but it's also honest. That's not an excuse. It's the reality of trauma-coded survival. Back then, freeze kept me alive, but now it just left me paralyzed, ashamed, broken, confused. That job didn't just cost me a paycheck, it cracked the illusion that I was fine now. I didn't realize how deeply ingrained it was, how much my body remembered, even if I didn't. Every training felt like I was slipping back into a mask that I swore I would never wear again. My nervous system went into a full revolt. Panic, dissociation, crippling exhaustion. Because I wasn't just working a job. I was reenacting a trauma. I grew up in a high control religious group. We were taught to obey without question, to avoid independent thinking, and to believe that our only value came from how much we sacrificed for the organization. We weren't allowed to pursue college. We weren't allowed to have close friendships outside of the religion. And we sure as hell weren't allowed to admit that we were struggling. Everything was about appearances. Everything was about staying faithful, even if it meant breaking yourself into pieces just to survive. So I got good at surviving. I got good at masking, good at freezing or fawning. And for most of my life, I thought that was a personal failing. But it wasn't. It was survival. The same freeze response that protected me at the Kingdom Hall kicked back in at that job, and I couldn't override it. No amount of logic or positive thinking could pull me out of it, because it wasn't about mindset. It was about my body remembering what my mind had tried to forget. And when you've been trained from birth to suppress your instincts, to trust the authority over your own voice, to believe that struggling is a sign of spiritual weakness, you don't just leave a cult. You spend years peeling it out of your bones. Jehovah's Witnesses taught me how to sell hope in exchange for obedience. And when I finally broke free, I thought I could just move on. But then a job comes along using the same tactics, and my body reacts like it's being dragged back to the Kingdom Hall. I left to start the insurance job with one goal in mind: to create space, to build something that felt aligned with who I am now. Coaching had been on the back of my mind for a long time. This vision of helping others reclaim their voice the way that I had been trying to reclaim mine. I imagined a space where people like me, recovering people pleasers, spiritual refugees, emotionally feral humans, could learn to trust their voice again. But I didn't launch my practice. I kept hitting it off. I told myself I need to focus on surviving first, that I couldn't afford the time. But if I'm being honest, that wasn't the whole truth. Part of the reason why I hadn't started my coaching practice yet is because I didn't think that I was healed enough to help anyone. I felt like I was too broken to be of service. And I know that isn't true, because healing isn't a final destination, it's a process. And it's the process that makes you capable of holding space for others. Not perfection, not polish, just presence. I wasn't planning on telling this story. Not publicly. I figured I would leave it tucked into my bio. Former Jehovah's Witness. And let it sit there like a quiet footnote. But then I started watching other survivors sharing their story, most recently on Cults to Consciousness and elsewhere. And something in me cracked open. Watching their stories didn't just validate mine. It reminded me that telling the truth is sometimes the only way to exercise the silence. Because their stories were so different and yet so painfully familiar. And I realized mine matters too. Even if it's not tidy, even if it's still unraveling, even if I don't have a polished redemption arc to offer. So, yeah, I am behind on rent. Yep, I am still figuring out how to move forward. But for once, I don't have to hide that. And I don't want to. Because somewhere out there, someone might need to hear that they're not broken. They're just frozen. And thawing takes time. I'm still in this. I don't have a neat resolution. I'm still figuring out how to pay the bills. I'm still terrified most days. If anything in this video resonated and you'd like to support my work or help me keep going, there is a link in the description. But I'm showing up because if my story helps someone feel less alone, then maybe that's the point. This video was not easy to make. But healing never is. Maybe I'm not healed, but I'm healing. And maybe that's enough for now. So, if you're watching this and you've ever felt too messy or too late or too lost to start again, you're not. We don't need to be finished to begin.